My name is Pamela. I'm 32 years old, and I'm standing outside my childhood home at 2 in the morning, completely drenched from the rain. Just 3 hours ago, my parents threw me out after I refused to pay $50,000 for my younger sister Madison's wedding. My mother's final words still echo in my ears. "You're dead to us." But what they don't know is that I'm holding a folder containing evidence that will destroy everything they built their lies upon. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, or dealt with financial manipulation from loved ones, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear stories from people who've survived family betrayal. Trust me, what happens next will show you that sometimes losing your family is the only way to save yourself. Let's dive into how my parents' greed and my sister's entitlement led to their complete downfall. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant understanding one fundamental rule: Madison could do no wrong, while I could do no right. From the moment my sister arrived 4 years after me, she became the sun around which our family orbited while I became invisible, unless they needed something. I started working at 14 bagging groceries at the local supermarket because my parents insisted I needed to learn responsibility. Every paycheck went straight to them for what they called family expenses, though I later discovered those expenses were Madison's dance classes, piano lessons, and designer clothes. While Madison attended the prestigious Rosewood Academy on our parents' dime, I fought for every opportunity at public school. Teachers praised my dedication, but at home, my straight A's meant nothing compared to Madison's participation trophy in ballet. I remember the night I got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship. My mother, Joyce, barely looked up from Madison's Instagram photos to mumble congratulations, while my father, William, reminded me I'd need to work full-time to cover the rest since they couldn't help with college expenses. Madison was only 14 then, but she already had a closet full of designer bags that cost more than my semester's tuition. I worked 3 jobs through community college, transferring to State University only after saving enough to avoid massive loans. Every holiday break meant double shifts at restaurants, while Madison jetted off to Miami or Cabo, with friends all funded by our parents who claimed they were building her network for future success. I graduated summa cum laude with a finance degree, landing a position at Preston Financial Advisory, while Madison was still figuring out her major at her $40,000 per year private university. The contrast became more obvious as years passed. I climbed the corporate ladder through 80-hour weeks and continuous education, earning my CFA certification while living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old Honda. Madison dropped out of college junior year to become an influencer, claiming traditional education stifled her creativity. Our parents not only supported this decision, but converted our basement into a photography studio, spending $15,000 on equipment for her career. When I questioned this investment during Thanksgiving dinner, my mother snapped that I was jealous of Madison's entrepreneurial spirit and natural charisma. Madison's influencer career consisted mainly of posting bikini photos and promoting detox teas to her bot followers. The few genuine sponsors she attracted quickly dropped her after discovering her engagement rates were fabricated. Yet our parents continued funding her lifestyle, always with creative explanations about supporting family and investing in potential. Meanwhile, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. While organizing my finances to buy my first condo, I found $30,000 in student loans I never took out. The applications were filed during my college years, bearing my forged signature and my parents' address for correspondence. When I confronted them about these fraudulent loans, they brushed it off as a misunderstanding, claiming they thought I needed help but was too proud to ask. The truth was uglier. They'd used that money to fund Madison's lifestyle while I worked myself to exhaustion. This discovery came just weeks before Madison announced her engagement to Bryce Wellington, a real estate developer from Old Money. Suddenly, my parents called an emergency family meeting about tradition and duty. They informed me that as the eldest daughter, tradition dictated I pay for my younger sister's wedding. Not contribute, not help, but cover the entire cost. Madison had already planned an extravagant affair at the Rosewood Country Club with 200 guests, designer everything, and a reception that belonged in a royal palace. The estimated cost was $50,000, not including the $20,000 honeymoon to Bora Bora they'd also designated as my responsibility. When I laughed thinking it was a poor joke, my father's face turned purple with rage. "This is your duty, Pamela. We've given you everything, and now it's time to give back to your family," he declared, as if my childhood of neglect and financial exploitation had been some kind of generous gift. Madison sat there with a smug smile, already showing me Pinterest boards of centerpieces that cost more than my monthly rent. She'd told everyone I was financing her dream wedding, posting on social media about her generous older sister before even asking me. When I questioned why Bryce's wealthy family wasn't contributing, my mother accused me of being bitter about my single status. "Just because no man wants to marry you doesn't mean you should ruin your sister's happiness," she said, her words carefully chosen to cut deep. Madison chimed in, claiming I owed her for stealing the spotlight by being boringly successful, while she was meant to be the star. The delusion in that room was suffocating, but I maintained my composure, simply stating I wouldn't pay a dime for the wedding. That's when things escalated. My father stood up, pointing his finger at me with 28 years of pent-up disappointment. "You pay for this wedding, or you're no longer our daughter. We'll tell everyone what an ungrateful, selfish person you really are. No one will believe the successful financial advisor over grieving parents abandoned by their heartless daughter." Madison added that I'd already ruined her life by being born first and taking all the attention, which was rich, considering I'd been invisible since her arrival. They gave me 1 week to decide, but I already knew my answer. Little did they know I'd been documenting everything, and their house of cards was about to collapse. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at my parents' house, and I arrived expecting a negotiation where rational minds might prevail. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Around the dining table sat my parents, Madison Bryce, and his parents, Ellen and Richard Wellington. On the table lay a contract already printed and awaiting my signature. The sight of it made my stomach turn, but what came next was worse. My father slid the document toward me with the confidence of a man who'd already won. The contract detailed not just the $50,000 for the wedding and $20,000 for the honeymoon, but additional clauses requiring me to provide wedding gifts worth at least $5,000 and cover any cost overruns up to 30% above budget. Ellen Wellington looked me up and down with undisguised disdain, her lips pursing as she noticed my simple business attire compared to Madison's designer ensemble. "How wonderful that you're successful enough to provide for your sister's happiness," she said, her tone suggesting she found nothing wonderful about me at all. "Though I must say, if you spent less time buried in spreadsheets and more time in the real world, perhaps you'd understand the importance of family support. Richard and I have concerns about Madison joining our family without proper backing, but your generous contribution will certainly ease those worries." The implication was clear. The Wellingtons viewed Madison as beneath their social status, and my money was meant to bridge that gap. Bryce shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, apparently content to let his parents and mine orchestrate this extortion. Madison, however, had more demands. She announced that since I'd be establishing a precedent of sisterly support, I should also provide the down payment for their first house, a modest contribution of $100,000 for a starter home in Westchester County. The casual way she threw out that number as if it were pocket change revealed just how disconnected from reality she'd become. "Madison, that's absurd," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "I'm still paying off student loans, including ones I didn't even take out." This reference to the fraudulent loans made my parents shift nervously, but they quickly recovered. My mother waved her hand dismissively, insisting those details were water under the bridge, and family meant moving forward, not dwelling on past misunderstandings. Richard Wellington cleared his throat and mentioned that emotional family dynamics aside, they'd already announced the wedding date and vendor arrangements to their entire social circle. That's when the real betrayal came to light. My father revealed they'd already put deposits down with every vendor from the country club to the florist to the band, all under my name. They'd told everyone I was handling payments and even provided my credit card information, which they'd somehow obtained. My phone had been silent during the meeting, but when I checked it, I found 17 missed calls from various vendors confirming arrangements and requesting final payments. The blood drained from my face as I realized the scope of their deception. You gave strangers my credit card information. I stood up so fast my chair toppled backward. Madison rolled her eyes and muttered about my dramatic tendencies, while my mother insisted they were simply being helpful, taking care of logistics so I could focus on work. The Wellingtons exchanged glances that suggested they found this display distasteful, but necessary for their son's happiness. Bryce finally spoke up not to defend me, but to assure everyone that once they were married, Madison would have access to better financial resources and wouldn't need to rely on family anymore. I pulled out my phone and began calling my credit card companies, immediately reporting fraudulent charges and requesting new cards. The room erupted in chaos. Madison started crying, wailing that I was ruining her life and destroying her dreams. My father slammed his fist on the table, declaring that I was bringing shame upon the Mitchell name and destroying our reputation in the community. Ellen Wellington stood up with theatrical dignity, announcing that perhaps they needed to reconsider whether Madison was suitable for their family if she came from such dysfunction. Sit down and sign the contract. My mother hissed, her usual sweet facade cracking to reveal something ugly underneath. We've already promised everyone you're paying. Do you want us to look like liars? Is that what you want to humiliate your family? The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. They'd built this entire situation on lies, and now demanded I bankrupt myself to maintain their fiction. When I continued making calls to protect my finances, Madison grabbed my phone, screaming that I was selfish and had always been jealous of her beauty and charm. I retrieved my phone and looked around the table at these people who claimed to be family. You want me to pay for a wedding based on lies? Madison told Bryce she's from money that she has a trust fund. You've all been living in a fantasy funded by fraud and manipulation. I won't be part of it anymore. The silence that followed was deafening until my Uncle Dennis called my father's phone. On speaker, we all heard him ask about the $10,000 my parents had borrowed on my behalf for a business investment I was supposedly too shy to request myself. The layers of deception began unraveling in real time. Bryce's face darkened as he looked at Madison, who was desperately trying to explain that her trust fund was simply tied up in investments. The Wellingtons stood to leave, declaring they needed to reassess the situation. In desperation, my parents played their final card. They told me I had 24 hours to reconsider, or they would ensure I regretted my selfishness for the rest of my life. They'd already told extended family friends and their entire church community that I was paying for everything as a gesture of love and family unity. If you don't follow through, my father said with cold calculation, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. We'll tell them about your greed, your jealousy, your mental instability. Who do you think they'll believe, the devoted parents and beautiful young bride, or the bitter spinster who chose money over family? Madison added that she had screenshots of text conversations proving I'd promised to pay, though I'd never sent such messages. It became clear they'd been planning this for months, maybe years, setting up a narrative where I was either the generous sister or the family villain. I gathered my things to leave, but not before making my position crystal clear. I won't pay a cent for this wedding or anything else. You've stolen enough from me. Do what you feel you need to do, but remember that truth has a way of surfacing. As I walked toward the door, my mother delivered her final blow. You pay for this wedding, or you disappear from our lives forever. You'll be dead to us, Pamela. No daughter of mine would abandon family like this. The ride home gave me time to process the full scope of their betrayal. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about years of systematic financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and now an attempt at public blackmail. They'd counted on my fear of public shame and desire for family connection to force my compliance. What they hadn't counted on was that I'd been quietly documenting everything from the fraudulent loans, to their tax schemes, to Madison's false persona. If they wanted war, I'd give them one, but it would be fought with truth, not lies. The next morning, I hired the best lawyer I could afford and began the process of protecting myself from the people who were supposed to protect me. I sat across from Monica Hartwell, the attorney recommended by my company's legal department, and watched her expression shift from professional interest to genuine concern as I laid out the evidence. My friend Natasha Kim, a licensed private investigator who specialized in financial fraud, sat beside me taking notes. What started as a simple case of family pressure had revealed itself as something far more sinister. The fraudulent student loans were just the tip of a very deep, very dirty iceberg. Natasha's investigation began with public records and quickly spiraled into a web of deception spanning over a decade. The first shocking discovery came from property records. My parents had remortgaged their house 3 times in the past 7 years, each time claiming financial hardship due to the economy. However, bank statements revealed the truth. The money didn't go toward keeping their home or surviving hard times. Instead, it funded Madison's apartment in the city during her brief college career, her failed fashion line attempt, multiple cosmetic procedures, and lavish vacations documented extensively on her Instagram. "Your parents are surprisingly sloppy criminals," Natasha observed, sliding a folder across Monica's desk. Inside were credit card statements for accounts I'd never opened, all maxed out and delinquent. Madison's influencer career, such as it was, had been entirely financed through identity theft. The photographer sessions, the designer clothes she posed in the rented luxury cars for her shoots, even the purchased followers and engagement on her social media, all charged to credit cards in my name. My parents had used my social security number with abandon, apparently believing I'd never check my credit report thoroughly enough to notice. The scope became clearer when we examined tax records. For 5 years after I'd moved out and become financially independent, my parents continued claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns. They'd collected refunds based on education credits for my college expenses, which I'd paid myself, and even claimed caregiving credits, suggesting I was disabled and living under their care. The audacity was breathtaking. While I'd been building my career and living independently, they'd been collecting thousands in fraudulent tax refunds. Monica leaned back in her chair, visibly disturbed by what we'd uncovered. "In my 20 years of practice, I've rarely seen family financial abuse this systematic. They didn't just take advantage of you, Pamela. They built their entire lifestyle on stealing from you." The credit report Natasha pulled showed the full damage: 17 accounts I'd never opened, a credit score demolished from collections, and late payments and inquiries from luxury car dealerships where Madison had apparently tried to lease vehicles in my name. The total debt approached $200,000. My coworker Brad knocked on the conference room door, apologizing for the interruption, but insisting I needed to see something immediately. He showed me his phone, where Madison's Instagram displayed her latest post, a video tour of the wedding venue with captions thanking her generous sister for making dreams come true. She'd tagged dozens of vendors and wedding guests, ensuring maximum visibility for her false narrative. The comment section overflowed with praise for my generosity and excitement about the upcoming nuptials. The timestamp showed she'd posted it while I was meeting with my legal team, clearly confident in her family's ability to force my compliance. "There's more," Natasha said quietly, pulling up financial records on her laptop. "Your grandmother, Rose Lancaster, has a substantial estate. According to these documents, she set up education trusts for both you and Madison when you were born. Madison's trust was distributed when she turned 18, roughly $100,000. Yours should have been available when you started college, but the distribution went to an account controlled by your parents. They intercepted approximately $120,000 meant for your education while you worked 3 jobs to pay for school. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could." My grandmother rose. My father's mother had always been kind to me during my childhood. She'd passed away during my senior year of high school, and I'd been told she left everything to charity because she didn't believe in making life too easy for young people. To learn she'd actually tried to provide for my education while my parents stole that provision felt like losing her all over again. Madison had burned through her inheritance in 2 years of partying and failed business ventures, while mine had been stolen before I knew it existed. Monica began outlining our legal options while Natasha continued digging. We could file criminal charges for identity theft, fraud, and forgery. The evidence was overwhelming and would likely result in convictions. However, Monica warned that family cases were always complicated, especially when the perpetrators had spent years establishing themselves as upstanding community members. My father served as a deacon at First Methodist Church. My mother volunteered with 3 different charities, and they'd carefully cultivated an image of devoted parents sacrificing everything for their children. That evening, as I processed the magnitude of my family's crimes, my phone rang. Harrison Chen, my direct supervisor at Preston Financial, sounded concerned. "Pamela, I need to ask you something in confidence. We received several calls today suggesting you have a gambling problem and that you've been stealing from client accounts to fund your addiction. Now, I know you well enough to recognize this as nonsense, but HR requires me to investigate. Can you help me understand what's happening? My parents had escalated from threats to active sabotage, trying to destroy the career I'd built without their help or support. I spent 2 hours in Harrison's office explaining the situation, providing documentation of the fraud and harassment. To his credit, Harrison not only believed me, but offered his full support. "Take whatever time you need to handle this," he said. "And if you need a forensic accountant to help build your case, we have excellent ones on retainer." His kindness nearly broke through my carefully maintained composure. For years, I'd accepted that professional success came without family support. To find more genuine care from colleagues than relatives was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. The next discovery came from an unexpected source. Aaron, my cousin on my mother's side, reached out through LinkedIn with a cryptic message about needing to talk privately about family matters. We met at a coffee shop downtown, where he revealed his own story. His parents, my Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, had been pressuring him to invest his inheritance from his late father's life insurance into a business venture they swore would triple his money. The business was Madison's latest scheme, a lifestyle brand combining fashion and wellness with my parents as silent partners. "They've been calling it a family investment opportunity," Aaron explained, showing me the prospectus they'd created. It was professionally done, complete with market projections and 5-year plans. But when I asked for financial statements or business registration documents, they got defensive. They said family doesn't need paperwork, just trust. The scheme would have absorbed his $300,000 inheritance into their pockets, likely funding Madison's wedding and lifestyle while leaving Aaron with nothing but broken promises. As we pieced together the full picture, a pattern emerged spanning decades. My parents had always lived beyond their means, using manipulation and fraud to maintain appearances. Extended family members began sharing their stories once Aaron and I started asking questions. Uncle Dennis had loaned them $30,000 for a supposed medical emergency that never existed. Aunt Patricia had co-signed a business loan they defaulted on, destroying her credit. Even family friends had been touched by their schemes, investing in various Madison ventures that inevitably failed. But the most shocking revelation came when Natasha uncovered Madison's criminal record. 3 years ago, she'd been arrested for shoplifting $8,000 worth of merchandise from Bergdorf Goodman. The charges were dropped after restitution was paid, but the court documents revealed the money came from a GoFundMe campaign my parents organized, claiming Madison needed cancer treatment. They'd defrauded charitable strangers to keep their daughter out of jail while maintaining their image. The documentation showed Madison had been caught on camera stuffing designer handbags into shopping bags from other stores, hardly the behavior of someone with a trust fund. I sat in my apartment that night surrounded by boxes of evidence and realized the full extent of my family's criminality. This wasn't just favoritism or poor financial management. This was a criminal enterprise built on exploiting anyone who showed them kindness or shared their DNA. The wedding demands were simply their latest and most audacious attempt at theft. They'd grown so comfortable with their crimes, they'd forgotten that documentation existed, that their victim might fight back, and that truth had power. The folder of evidence grew thicker each day as more discoveries surfaced. Forged signatures on loan applications, fake charity organizations they'd created to solicit donations, even a brief stint selling fraudulent insurance policies to elderly church members. Through it all, Madison remained the golden child, the beneficiary of their crimes, while I'd been designated the eternal provider, too responsible to abandon family despite their abuse. They'd counted on my work ethic and sense of duty to ensure their lifestyle, never imagining I'd choose justice over blood. The smear campaign began on a Tuesday morning, with surgical precision. I woke up to find my Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn flooded with messages from concerned friends and distant relatives. My parents had posted a lengthy statement on their social media accounts portraying me as a mentally unstable daughter who'd abandoned family values for corporate greed. They claimed I'd been diagnosed with severe personality disorders, that I'd threatened physical violence against Madison, and that they were seeking intervention services to help their troubled child. The post garnered hundreds of sympathetic comments within hours, each one another nail in the coffin of my reputation. Madison's contribution to the character assassination came in the form of fabricated text message screenshots. She'd created elaborate fake conversations where I supposedly threatened to ruin her wedding, destroy her relationship, and ensure she died alone and unloved. The messages were disturbing in their detail and painted me as unhinged with jealousy. She posted these across every platform, tagging mutual acquaintances and adding commentary about fearing for her safety. Friends I'd known since college began reaching out confused and concerned, wondering if I needed psychological help. The professional attacks proved more damaging than the personal ones. My office phone rang constantly with anonymous complaints about my behavior, my competence, and my integrity. Clients received emails warning them about my supposed gambling addiction and suggesting they verify their account balances. Though Harrison and the senior partners recognized the harassment for what it was, the sheer volume created an atmosphere of chaos that disrupted normal business operations. The promotion I'd worked toward for 2 years evaporated as management decided they couldn't elevate someone surrounded by such controversy regardless of its validity. Aunt Linda, who'd always seemed reasonable compared to my parents, called me at work to deliver a prepared speech about family disappointment and selfishness. She revealed that my parents had been supporting the family for years, claiming they'd paid for my grandfather's cancer treatment, covered cousin Emily's rehab costs, and kept various relatives afloat during hard times. None of it was true, but the lies had been seeded so carefully over time that the extended family believed them completely. In their narrative, I was the ungrateful daughter hoarding wealth, while my parents struggled to help everyone else. The harassment escalated from digital to physical. My apartment building manager knocked on my door one evening, apologetically explaining they'd received numerous complaints about noise, suspicious visitors, and possible drug activity in my unit. The complaints were obviously false as I lived alone and kept quiet hours, but they created a paper trail that could lead to eviction. Security footage revealed nothing because the complaints were called in anonymously, but the timing aligned perfectly with my refusal to pay for the wedding. My parents had weaponized every system they could access against me. My church community, where I'd found solace and friendship outside my toxic family, began treating me differently. My father, leveraging his position as deacon, had shared concerns about my spiritual well-being with church leadership. He painted a picture of a daughter lost to worldly ambition, abandoning family values for money. Some congregants offered to pray for my redemption, while others simply avoided me. The youth group I'd volunteered with for 3 years asked me to take a temporary break until my family situation stabilized, concerned about the example I might set for impressionable minds. The social isolation tactics intensified when Madison contacted my ex-boyfriend Derek, whom I dated for 2 years before our amicable split. She warned him about my deteriorating mental state and suggested he share any concerning information from our relationship that might help the family get me treatment. To Derek's credit, he immediately forwarded me her messages and offered to testify about her harassment if needed. However, not everyone showed such loyalty. Several friends from my book club and hiking group distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the drama surrounding me. My health began deteriorating under the constant assault. Anxiety attacks struck at random moments, leaving me gasping in bathroom stalls at work or pulling over on highways when my chest tightened unbearably. Insomnia became my constant companion as I lay awake anticipating the next attack, checking security systems, and reviewing legal documents. I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks, my clothes hanging loose on a frame that had always been healthy and strong. Coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes and the tremor in my hands, but I couldn't explain that my own family was systematically trying to destroy me. The financial attacks grew more sophisticated as my parents realized their initial attempts had failed. They tried accessing my investment accounts using security questions they could answer from knowledge of my childhood. When that failed, they attempted to add themselves as authorized users on my credit cards, claiming a family emergency required immediate access. The banks flagged these attempts thanks to the fraud alerts I'd placed, but each notification spiked my anxiety higher. They'd moved from theft to active economic warfare, trying to destabilize every financial foundation I'd built. Then came the discovery that shattered any remaining hope of reconciliation. My life insurance policy, which I'd purchased years ago when I started my career, listed my parents as beneficiaries from when I was young, and naive enough to trust them. Recent activity showed they'd attempted to increase the policy amount and had inquired about terms for collecting benefits. The insurance company's fraud department contacted me after finding the inquiries suspicious, particularly questions about what would constitute accidental death or disappearance. The implication was clear and terrifying. My value to them dead might exceed my value alive if I wouldn't comply with their demands. Madison's influencer career, built on lies and funded by fraud, began crumbling as the truth spread beyond our immediate circle. Brands distanced themselves from the controversy, and her follower count dropped daily as people realized her lifestyle was a facade. Rather than accept responsibility, she blamed me entirely, posting increasingly unhinged videos about sister jealousy and family sabotage. In one particularly disturbing post, she claimed I'd poisoned her pets as a child and had tried to push her downstairs multiple times. The lies grew more elaborate and detached from reality with each passing day. My support system, though shaken, began to solidify around those who truly knew me. Stella Martinez, my colleague and closest work friend, became my fierce advocate, shutting down office gossip and accompanying me to parking garages after late nights. Her sister Isabella, a detective with the Financial Crimes Division, provided unofficial guidance on documenting the harassment and building criminal cases. Brad organized a quiet support network among coworkers who'd experienced family financial abuse, creating a safe space to share experiences and resources. The escalation reached dangerous levels when I received photos of my apartment taken from angles suggesting someone had been inside. Nothing was missing or disturbed, but the violation of my private space sent me into a panic spiral. I changed locks, installed additional security cameras, and began staying with Stella on particularly bad nights. The police took reports but explained that without concrete evidence of breaking and entering, their options were limited. The psychological warfare was taking its toll exactly as my family intended. Through it all, I continued gathering evidence with Monica and Natasha, building cases that would stand up in court. Every attack they launched created more documentation of harassment and fraud. Their desperation made them sloppy, leaving digital footprints and paper trails they'd previously been careful to avoid. My parents had operated for so long without consequences, they'd forgotten that actions have repercussions, that victims can become warriors, and that the truth, once unleashed, cannot be contained. The war my family declared tested every ounce of strength I'd built through years of independence. But with each attack survived and documented, my resolve hardened. They'd created the very weapon that would destroy them, a daughter who'd learned to fight back armed with truth, and supported by people who valued integrity over blood ties. The girl who'd once desperately sought their approval had evolved into a woman who recognized that some bridges need to burn to light the way forward. After weeks of absorbing their attacks and documenting every assault on my character and finances, I finally shifted from defense to offense. Monica Hartwell sat across from me in her office, spreading out the comprehensive case we'd built like a general planning a military campaign. The evidence was overwhelming: identity theft, tax fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, harassment, and attempted insurance fraud. The question wasn't whether we could win, but how completely we could dismantle their criminal enterprise while protecting other victims. The first strategic move involved filing formal police reports for identity theft and fraud. I spent 6 hours at the police station with Detective Isabella Martinez, Stella's sister, meticulously documenting each fraudulent account, forged signature, and stolen fund. Isabella had seen plenty of family fraud cases, but the scope of my parents' crimes impressed even her. They've been running a full-scale criminal operation using your identity as collateral. She observed initialing evidence bags containing years of documentation. By the end of the day, case numbers were assigned, and the investigative machinery of law enforcement began turning. Next came the crucial step of alerting all 3 credit bureaus. I didn't just dispute the fraudulent accounts. I placed comprehensive fraud alerts and credit freezes across every system. Each bureau received detailed documentation of the identity theft, ensuring that any future attempts to use my information would trigger immediate red flags. The process was exhausting, requiring countless forms and affidavits, but watching those fraudulent accounts get flagged and investigated felt like slowly reclaiming pieces of my stolen life. The decision to contact Bryce Wellington directly required careful consideration. Despite his initial complicity in the wedding extortion, I suspected he didn't know the full truth about Madison's background or character. I reached out through his sister Caroline, whom I'd researched and found to be a successful attorney with a reputation for integrity. We met at a discreet downtown restaurant where I presented a carefully curated selection of evidence: Madison's arrest record, the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign proof of her purchased social media following, and most damningly recent photos Natasha had captured of Madison entering a hotel with her personal trainer, Jake Morrison, during times she'd told Bryce she was at work events. Caroline's expression shifted from skepticism to horror as she reviewed the documentation. Bryce thinks he's marrying into a well-connected family with old money traditions, she said quietly. Madison told him she has a trust fund that kicks in after marriage, that your parents are philanthropists who've donated millions to charity. She said you're jealous because you're older and still single, that you've always competed with her. I provided Caroline with evidence showing the truth: the fake charity organizations, the remortgaged house, the systematic theft from family members. Caroline promised to handle the situation delicately but effectively. While Caroline worked on her brother, I systematically contacted every wedding vendor my parents had fraudulently engaged in my name. Armed with police report numbers and fraud documentation, I explained the situation to each business owner. Most were horrified to learn they'd been unwittingly participating in fraud. The country club, the florist, the band, the caterer, the photographer, and even the dress boutique where Madison had charged a $15,000 gown to my credit all agreed to cancel the contracts and pursue my parents for any deposits paid. Several vendors revealed that my parents had been oddly insistent about putting everything in my name, despite claiming to be paying a red flag they'd ignored at the time. The criminal investigation expanded as Detective Martinez uncovered connections to other victims. My information led to discoveries of similar schemes targeting elderly church members, distant relatives, and business associates of my father. The investigation revealed that William Mitchell had been running various investment scams through his position as deacon, promising high returns on faith-based investments that never existed. My mother, Joyce, had been collecting donations for fake medical emergencies and disaster relief funds, keeping the money while cultivating an image of charitable devotion. Madison had been the pretty face of many schemes, using her social media presence to add legitimacy to fraudulent fundraisers. I reached out to Aaron, my cousin, who'd almost lost his inheritance to their latest scheme, and together we began contacting other family members who might have been victimized. The stories poured in once people felt safe to share. Cousin Emily revealed that the rehab costs Aunt Linda mentioned never existed. Emily had never struggled with addiction. Uncle Dennis discovered that the $10,000 he'd loaned had been immediately transferred to Madison's account for a shopping spree in Paris. Elderly relatives had been convinced to sign over power of attorney for various legal matters only to find their accounts drained. The house of cards began collapsing when local news picked up the story. A reporter named Jennifer Chang had been investigating financial fraud in religious communities and found our case through court records. Her initial story, Deacon Charged in Multi-Year Fraud Scheme, aired on the 6 o'clock news and immediately went viral in our community. The carefully maintained image my parents had cultivated shattered overnight. The church launched an internal investigation discovering missing funds from various charitable drives my mother had organized. William was immediately suspended from his position pending the investigation's outcome. Madison's world imploded spectacularly when Caroline Wellington presented Bryce with the evidence of her infidelity and fraud. The confrontation happened at their engagement party, a lavish affair at the Wellington estate meant to formally introduce Madison to their social circle. Bryce had planned to quietly end the relationship, but Madison's behavior at the party where she'd been drinking heavily and bragging about her wedding plans pushed him to act immediately. In front of 200 guests, he announced the wedding was off-cited fraud and infidelity as reasons, and had security escort Madison from the property. The video of Madison's meltdown at the engagement party captured by multiple guests became social media gold. She screamed about lawsuits, claimed I'd orchestrated everything out of jealousy, and had to be physically removed while throwing champagne glasses. Her carefully curated influencer image evaporated as brands rushed to disassociate themselves. Within 48 hours, she'd lost every sponsorship, her follower count plummeted as purchased bots were purged, and she faced potential lawsuits from companies whose products she'd promoted under false pretenses. The IRS entered the picture when our documented evidence revealed years of tax fraud. The investigation uncovered not just the fraudulent dependent claims and education credits, but an entire shadow economy of unreported income from their various scams. The audit expanded to include Madison's influencer income, which she'd never properly reported while claiming poverty to avoid contributing to household expenses. The penalties and back taxes owed would devastate them financially, even before considering restitution to victims. My workplace situation improved dramatically once the truth emerged. Harrison Chen called me into his office not for another complaint, but to apologize for the promotion situation and offer something better. "We've been watching how you've handled this crisis," he said. "Your professionalism, documentation skills, and strategic thinking under extreme pressure have been remarkable. We're creating a new position, Director of Risk Management, and we'd like you to consider it." The promotion came with a significant salary increase and the full support of senior management, who now saw me as someone who could handle any challenge with grace and determination. The restraining orders I filed against my family members were approved without hesitation, given the documented harassment and threats. The judge, after reviewing the evidence of their attempts to access my life insurance and the suspicious inquiries about my death, granted comprehensive protection orders. My parents and Madison were legally prohibited from contacting me, approaching my home or workplace, or using third parties to harass me. The violation of these orders would result in immediate arrest, finally giving me a legal shield against their attacks. Support poured in from unexpected sources as the story spread. Other victims of family financial abuse reached out with their own stories and resources. A support group formed organically, meeting weekly to share experiences and healing strategies. Local financial advisors offered pro bono services to help victims understand their rights and protect their assets. The community that had initially sided with my parents began to see the truth, offering apologies and support for the courage it took to stand against family criminality. The counteroffensive succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Each strategic move had stripped away another layer of their power, revealing the rot beneath. The golden child who'd lived off stolen funds faced bankruptcy and criminal charges. The parents who'd preached family values while robbing their children faced social ostracism and financial ruin. The relatives who'd enabled their behavior scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Most importantly, other victims found their voices and sought justice, preventing future schemes from destroying more lives. As I sat in Monica's office reviewing the case's progress, She smiled with grim satisfaction. "You've done more than protect yourself, Pamela. You've exposed a criminal network that might have operated for decades more. Your courage to fight back has saved countless future victims." The girl who'd been designated family ATM had transformed into a woman who refused to be anyone's victim, armed with truth supported by genuine allies, and determined to see justice served regardless of blood ties. The Wellington engagement party disaster marked the beginning of the end, but Madison's public humiliation was merely the first domino to fall in spectacular fashion. Videos of her champagne-throwing tantrums circulated across every social media platform, tagged with hashtags like fraudulent influencer and wedding scammer. What she didn't know during her meltdown was that several guests were journalists and social media personalities who live-streamed the entire event. By morning, Madison Mitchell had become the internet's newest villain, her face attached to memes about gold diggers and fake heiresses. The attempted physical attack on me came 3 days later on a Thursday afternoon that started like any other. I was leaving Preston Financial after a successful presentation when Madison appeared in the parking garage, disheveled and clearly intoxicated despite it being barely 2 in the afternoon. She charged at me, screaming incoherently about ruining her life, throwing wild punches while security cameras captured every second. My self-defense training kicked in, and I managed to restrain her until building security arrived. She was still screaming threats when the police took her away in handcuffs, adding assault charges to her growing legal troubles. The subsequent raid on my parents' house came with dawn on Saturday morning. Detective Martinez had warned me it was coming, advising I might want to be elsewhere to avoid any appearance of involvement. I spent that morning at Stella's apartment watching news updates on my phone as reporters gathered outside my childhood home. FBI agents emerged carrying boxes of documents, computers, and evidence bags, while my parents stood in their robes on the front lawn, captured by news cameras as their lifetime of crimes caught up with them in full public view. William's termination from his position at Morrison Industries came via overnight courier the same day. His employer of 23 years had discovered discrepancies in expense accounts going back a decade, triggered by the fraud investigation's expansion. He'd been submitting false receipts claiming business trips that never happened, and charging personal expenses as client entertainment. The total exceeded $60,000 in stolen funds. His professional reputation, built over decades, crumbled in hours as word spread through industry networks about the deacon who'd been stealing from both his church and his employer. Joyce's expulsion from her various charity boards happened simultaneously, each organization rushing to distance itself from scandal. The Garden Club discovered she'd been skimming from fundraiser proceeds for years. The hospital auxiliary found irregularities in donation records she'd managed. The Women's Methodist Alliance uncovered that several large donations she'd claimed to facilitate had never materialized, though she'd taken credit and social status from the phantom philanthropy. Every institution she'd used to build her social standing systematically ejected her as forensic accountants, uncovered theft after theft. The foreclosure notice arrived at their house within 2 weeks of the raid. With William unemployed, Joyce's charity income streams severed, and massive legal bills mounting, they couldn't maintain the facade of prosperity. The house they'd remortgaged 3 times to fund Madison's lifestyle went into immediate default. Neighbors who'd once admired the successful Mitchell family now watched moving trucks arrive to salvage what they could before the bank took possession. My mother was seen sobbing on the front steps, finally experiencing the financial desperation she'd inflicted on others for years. Madison's arrest at my workplace had violated her bail conditions from previous charges, landing her in county jail for 30 days. Her time inside became public knowledge when fellow inmates, unimpressed by her attitude, shared stories on social media after their releases. The former influencer who'd flaunted designer goods and luxury vacations struggled with communal showers and bologna sandwiches. Jake Morrison, her personal trainer and affair partner, gave an exclusive interview to a gossip blog, revealing that Madison had promised him a cut of her wedding gifts and my supposed fortune in exchange for his services, adding prostitution implications to her already destroyed reputation. The criminal trial moved faster than anyone expected, partly because my parents' attorney advised them to take plea deals rather than face jury trials with overwhelming evidence. William pled guilty to 14 counts of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. Joyce accepted guilt on 11 counts of similar charges. The judge, unimpressed by their age and previous standing, sentenced William to 5 years with possibility of parole in 3, while Joyce received 3 years with potential parole in 18 months. Their tearful statements about making mistakes and loving their family too much fell flat as victim after victim provided impact statements detailing financial and emotional devastation. Madison's trial proceeded separately due to additional assault charges and her refusal to accept any plea deal. She maintained her innocence despite video evidence, fraudulent documents bearing her signature, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Her court-appointed attorney, clearly frustrated by her client's detachment from reality, tried arguing diminished capacity due to narcissistic personality disorder. The strategy backfired when prosecution presented evidence of calculated schemes spanning years. Madison received 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, and mandatory restitution to all victims, including me. The extended family fractures proved irreparable as the full scope of deception emerged. Aunt Linda, who'd initially sided with my parents, discovered they'd been spreading lies about her for years, claiming she was an alcoholic who couldn't be trusted with money to prevent other relatives from confiding in her. Uncle Dennis learned that the medical emergency he'd funded was actually Madison's bail money from her shoplifting arrest. Cousins who'd been pitted against each other through manufactured drama realized they'd been manipulated to prevent them from comparing notes about various schemes. The family reunions that once happened quarterly ceased entirely as trust evaporated. The IRS penalties delivered the final financial blow. After extensive audits revealed years of unreported income from various scams and fraudulent deductions, my parents faced tax bills exceeding $400,000. Including penalties and interest. Their retirement accounts were seized, their few remaining assets frozen, and wage garnishment orders prepared for any future income. The golden years they'd planned to fund through continued theft became a promise of poverty and payment plans extending beyond their life expectancies. Public shame followed them relentlessly. William and Joyce Mitchell became cautionary tales in financial fraud presentations. Their mugshots appeared in true crime forums discussing family scams. The church where William had served as deacon created new financial oversight policies specifically citing his theft as the reason. Former friends crossed streets to avoid them, and businesses they'd frequented for decades banned them. The social status they'd killed relationships to maintain evaporated more thoroughly than if it had never existed. Madison emerged from jail to find herself unemployable and friendless. Her attempts to restart her influencer career failed as every platform had banned her for fraud. Traditional employers Googled her name and found pages of scandal. Even minimum wage retail positions rejected her applications once background checks revealed her crimes. She moved back with our parents into their cramped apartment, 3 former fraudsters packed into 2 bedrooms, subsisting on food stamps and whatever temporary labor William could find as an aging felon. The Wellington family, initially mortified by their association with the scandal, ultimately thanked me for preventing a catastrophic mistake. Bryce found genuine love with a pediatric nurse who cared nothing for his wealth, while Caroline and I developed an unexpected friendship through the ordeal. She provided pro bono legal assistance to several fraud victims, using her influence to ensure thorough prosecution. The family's public statements supporting victims and condemning financial fraud helped restore their reputation, while further damaging my family's attempts at rehabilitation. Local news followed the story through its conclusion, with Jennifer Chang winning an investigative journalism award for her exposé on religious community fraud. Her final piece featured interviews with dozens of victims who'd found courage to speak out after my case went public. The systematic nature of faith-based financial fraud in our community led to new regulations and oversight measures. My parents became the face of why congregations needed financial transparency, their photographs used in fraud prevention seminars across the state. As the dust settled on the collapse, I sometimes felt a pang of grief for the family that might have been. But those moments passed quickly, replaced by relief at escaping their toxicity and pride in helping prevent future victims. Watching their empire of lies crumble taught me that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it arrives exactly when needed, thoroughly and publicly, leaving no doubt about truth versus fiction. The family that had demanded I fund their lies with my success instead funded their own destruction with their crimes. 6 months after the trials ended, I stood in my new corner office at Preston Financial, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. The promotion to Director of Risk Management had come with more than a title change. I now led a team dedicated to protecting clients from financial fraud using hard-won expertise from my personal battlefield. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's attempts to destroy me had instead created exactly the credentials needed for this role. Harrison Chen often introduced me as the executive who'd survived the worst-case scenario and emerged stronger. The apartment I'd fled to during the worst of the harassment became a distant memory. My new home, a 2-bedroom condo in a secure building downtown, represented more than upgraded living space. It was a sanctuary I'd earned through perseverance, decorated with art, chosen for joy rather than investment value, filled with books about healing and growth rather than mere professional development. The second bedroom served as an office where I worked on my passion project, a comprehensive guide for financial abuse survivors that would eventually help thousands recognize and escape similar situations. Therapy with Dr. Lin Chen proved transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Our sessions initially focused on trauma processing and anxiety management, but gradually shifted to examining deeper patterns. I discovered how years of gaslighting had made me doubt my own perceptions, how constant criticism had driven perfectionism, and how conditional love had taught me to equate worth with productivity. The healing process wasn't linear. Some days I felt invincible, others I grieved the family I'd never truly had. But each session built stronger foundations for genuine self-worth, independent of anyone's approval. The support group I'd started with fellow survivors evolved into a registered nonprofit organization. Financial Freedom from Family Fraud, or F4 as members called it, met weekly in community centers and online. We shared resources, recommended lawyers, celebrated victories, and held space for grief. Watching other survivors transform from victims to warriors reminded me daily that healing happened in community. The woman who'd once stood alone against her entire family now stood with dozens who understood that blood doesn't excuse abuse. My relationship with Grandmother Rose flourished once we cleared away decades of lies. She'd moved to an assisted living facility just 20 minutes from my new home, and our weekly lunches became treasured rituals. She shared stories of my father's childhood, helping me understand how he'd become capable of such cruelty. Apparently, his parents had favored his brother, severely teaching him that love was transactional and finite. While this context didn't excuse his choices, it helped me release some anger. Rose revised her will with Caroline Wellington's help, ensuring no one could intercept her final gifts of love. The romantic relationship that developed with Marcus Torres surprised everyone, including us. We'd met at F4 when he joined after escaping his own financially abusive family. Neither of us was looking for romance, both too focused on healing to consider dating, but shared understanding created deep connection. He knew why I checked my credit report monthly without thinking it paranoid. I understood his need to maintain separate bank accounts without seeing it as trust issues. Our first kiss happened after a particularly intense support group session, both of us realizing we'd found someone who could love our scars as much as our strengths. Professional success accelerated as my story became known in financial circles. Speaking invitations arrived from banking associations, fraud prevention conferences, and women's leadership summits. Initially reluctant to publicize my pain, I realized sharing my experience could prevent others' suffering. My presentations focused on recognizing early warning signs, protecting personal information even from family, and understanding that successful people often became targets for financial abuse. The woman who'd once been ashamed of her family's crimes now used that experience to educate thousands. My parents' post-incarceration attempts at reconciliation followed predictable patterns. Letters arrived monthly, cycling through false apologies, guilt trips, and renewed demands for support. They claimed prison had changed them, that they'd found religion again, that family should forgive. I read each letter once before filing them with my attorney, maintaining documentation habits that had become second nature. Their inability to acknowledge real harm or take genuine responsibility confirmed that no contact remained the only healthy choice. Some bridges burned to light the way forward needed to stay ash. Madison's attempts differed only in medium, arriving as social media messages from new accounts created to circumvent blocks. She vacillated between rage at her circumstances and syrupy pleas for sisterly support. Her latest message claimed she was pregnant and needed help, a lie exposed when Marcus's friend saw her drinking at a bar that same week. The golden child who'd consumed everything offered to her now scraped by on whatever schemes she could manage without parental support or my identity to exploit. Her refusal to accept responsibility ensured she'd never rebuild meaningfully. The financial recovery took years but proceeded steadily. Credit scores climbed as fraudulent accounts aged off reports and positive history accumulated. Investment accounts grew through careful planning and legitimate earning rather than theft. The retirement fund that seemed impossible during the crisis became reality through disciplined saving. Most satisfying was establishing a scholarship fund at my community college for students escaping abusive families. The money my parents stole to fund Madison's lifestyle now helped deserving students achieve what she'd squandered. Professional relationships deepened as colleagues witnessed my integrity under pressure. Stella Martinez became more than a work friend, evolving into chosen family who celebrated holidays and milestones together. Brad formed part of my inner circle, someone who'd proven loyalty when it mattered. The network of support that emerged during crisis became the foundation for a richer life than I'd imagined possible while trapped in toxic family dynamics. Success meant more when shared with people who'd stood by me through darkness. The speaking engagement that brought everything full circle happened at First Methodist Church, the congregation where my father had served as deacon, while robbing members blind. Pastor Reynolds invited me to share my story as part of their financial transparency initiative. Standing at the podium where William Mitchell had preached family values while destroying his own, I spoke truth to people who'd been deceived by carefully crafted lies. The congregation's response, mixing shame at being fooled with gratitude for truth, reminded me that his victims extended far beyond blood relatives. Forgiveness became a complex concept I examined repeatedly with Dr. Chen. I learned to forgive myself for taking so long to see the truth, for hoping they'd change, for mourning relationships that existed only in my imagination. Forgiving them proved unnecessary for my healing. Some acts created consequences that apologies couldn't erase, boundaries that love couldn't cross. I wished them no additional harm beyond justice's requirements, but I also felt no obligation to enable their healing at my expense. Freedom came from releasing the need for their validation or remorse. The book I published about surviving family financial fraud became an unexpected bestseller. Blood Money. When Family Becomes Financial Predator resonated with thousands who'd suffered similar abuse. Book tours brought me face-to-face with survivors worldwide, each sharing stories of theft justified by blood ties. The royalties funded F4's expansion into a national organization, providing resources, legal referrals, and emotional support for victims. My family's attempts to profit from my success had instead created platforms for protecting others from similar predators. As I write this conclusion, Marcus and I are planning our wedding, a modest affair focused on celebrating genuine love with chosen family. We joke that our prenup is the most romantic document ever created, protecting both of us from financial exploitation while building a shared future. Grandmother Rose will attend as my only biological family, surrounded by the friends who became my true relatives. The irony that my refusal to fund one wedding led to planning another based on truth rather than lies feels like poetic justice. The journey from dutiful daughter to independent woman cost everything I thought I valued, and gave me infinitely more in return. I lost a family that never truly loved me, but found a life filled with authentic connection. The success they tried to steal became the foundation for helping others. Their crimes intended to destroy me instead forged someone unbreakable. To anyone trapped in similar situations, know this: your worth isn't determined by those who would exploit you. Freedom exists beyond their lies, and chosen family waits to embrace the person you become when you stop funding others' fantasies with your reality. That morning, standing in the rain, cast out for refusing exploitation, I thought I'd lost everything. Instead, I'd finally begun to find myself. The cost of that discovery, every lawsuit, every sleepless night, every moment of grief for the family that never was, proved worthwhile. Not because revenge satisfied, though justice had its moments, but because authenticity trumped approval. The woman typing these final words owes nothing to anyone except herself, and that freedom is worth more than any wedding could ever cost. What would you do if your family demanded you sacrifice your future for their lies? If you've survived similar betrayal, share your story in the comments to help others recognize they're not alone. Please like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over family manipulation. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that blood doesn't grant the right to bleed you dry. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the family you choose can heal wounds the family you're born into created. Stay strong, protect yourselves, and never apologize for refusing to fund someone else's fantasy with your reality.